Thank you, Tom, and good afternoon. Welcome back from lunch. Now, I understand that I'm between you and the next break, so I'm going to try and keep this moving forward so that we can stay on time for that. So again, welcome back from lunch. The presentation that I will be giving today will be an overview of the reports available to you through the SNF Quality Reporting Program. As with the other presentations, we've also included acronyms in this presentation. There are 2 slides of acronyms and their definitions, so please feel free to reference those should you have any questions about their meaning. Following this presentation, it is my hope that you will be able to recall the types of quality measures by data source that are reported in the SNF QRP program, that you'll be able to recognize the reports that are available to you in the CASPER reporting application, that you'll be able to describe the purpose of the reports, and identify how each report might be helpful to you in your quality improvement activities. So let's first start by reviewing the quality measures that are reported for the SNF QRP program. And we know that there are 2 types of quality measures by data source that are reported. There are the assessment-based quality measures, and those are calculated using the MDS 3.0 data. And there are the Medicare fee-for-service claims-based measures. Now, as you all know, you don't have to submit additional data for the Medicare claims-based measures, but you do for the assessment-based measures through the MDS. Currently, there are 3 assessment-based measures reported on your SNF QRP reports. And we've listed those here for you. There's the application of percent of residents experiencing 1 or more falls with major injury. There is the percent of patients or residents with pressure ulcers that are new or worsened, and the application of the percent of long-term care hospital patients with an admission and discharge assessment and a care plan that addresses function. So here we have already a knowledge check. So go ahead and prepare your Slido application and be prepared to answer this question. The question is, the Medicare spending per beneficiary is an example of which type of QM or quality measure? Is the answer A, assessment-based measure, B, claims-based measure, or C, neither of the above? And we have some responses, but I'm going to wait a moment and allow others to respond should they wish to do so. And it looks like things are sort of slowing down, so let's check out the answer. And overwhelmingly, we saw that the majority of you responded that the correct answer is the claims-based measure, and that's correct. MSPB, or Medicare spending per beneficiary, is a Medicare fee-for-service claims-based measure. Nice job. Let's now take a moment and delve into the SNF QRP reports that are available to you. There are 3 types of reports. There is the review and correct report, the QM or quality measure reports, and the provider preview report. We're going to review how these reports, the data on these reports are eventually posted publicly on the Nursing Home Compare website, and how you might be able to use these reports in your quality improvement activities in your facility. This slide simply shows the flow of the quality measure data as they are first reported on the quality measure and review and correct reports. Once the data are frozen on the review and correct reports, those data are set aside and reported on the provider preview reports, and then ultimately publicly reported on the Nursing Home Compare website. Oops. So let's first start talking about the review and correct report. The review and correct report is what we call a user requested on-demand report. This means that it is a report that you must run yourself. The report is not going to be automatically generated and made available to you. However, you can run this report at any frequency which you feel would be helpful as you're monitoring your facility's measure outcomes. This report contains data that's confidential to your facility. That means that other facilities cannot see your data on this review and correct report. This report displays data based on the quarters. When a reporting quarter ends, the report is available to you, or the measure results for that reporting quarter are available to you the very next calendar day. For example, quarter 2 2018 ended on June 30th of this year. The very next day, July 1st, began a new quarter, which means that the data for quarter 2 2018 was now added to the review and correct report. So you can begin monitoring your measure results for that quarter's data. The data that are displayed in the review and correct report are calculated weekly. That means any qualifying assessment that is submitted from the time the calculations were last ran until they're run the next week will be included in the calculations. So you can run this report after the calculations are run weekly to monitor your measure results. And it might be important to note that the calculations are run early every Monday morning for the review and correct report. In addition to displaying the data for your measure results, the review and correct report displays to you the data correction deadline for each calendar quarter and reporting year, and an indicator whether or not the data correction period is open or closed. If the data correction period is open, that means that you are still able to submit assessments for that with target dates during that reporting quarter and have data for those assessments included in the quality measure calculations on the review and correct report. So the review and correct report allows you to obtain aggregate performance scores for up to the past 4 quarters on one report. After the first quarter is reported on the review and correct report, subsequent quarters are added. The data are reported for each quarter, and the data are also reported cumulatively for the 4-quarter time period. It's important to know that the review and correct report will drop off the oldest quarter of data when the newest quarter of data becomes available. So in my example of adding quarter 2 2018 data to the report on July 1st, when that new quarter was added, quarter 1 2017 was removed from the report. So it becomes a rolling process. As a new quarter is added, the older quarter's data is removed. And the review and correct report also, it's important to remember that this does not display your annual payment update compliance. This is simply to provide you with your measure results for your facility. This table shows you the data collection periods by the calendar quarter and the associated data correction deadlines. You are allowed a time period of 4.5 months after the end of the quarterly reporting period for which you can submit late, missing, or corrected assessments and have the data from those records included in those quarterly calculations. Looking at this table, you'll see that we have 3 columns. So the first column will identify the quarter in the reporting year. The second column identifies the begin and end dates for that quarter. And the third column identifies the quarterly review and correction periods for that quarter. So looking at the first row, for example, for quarter one for a reporting period, the dates included in that period are January 1st through March 31st. On April 1st, that's a new calendar quarter, data for quarter one would be available on your review and correct report. Once the data are available, you can begin viewing those measure results, and you have between April 1st and August 15th to correct any assessments or submit late or missing assessments to ensure that those are included in your measure calculations for that calendar quarter. So here is a picture of the review and correct report. And we'll just spend a moment and take a look at the information that's displayed to you. So at the top, you can see that your facility information is displayed. That includes your facility CCN or CMS certification number, your facility name, and other demographic information. Beneath this section, you will see that the SNF measure that's being reported in the data table displays, in addition to the unique CMS measure ID. Beneath that section is the table legend, which includes any important notes which will help you interpret the data that's displayed in the data table. And finally, the most important part is probably the data table. So let's talk about that in two sections. The left section contains the time periods that we looked at on the prior slide. So you'll see that the reporting quarter is displayed in the left most column. So we have the quarter and the year. And notice there is a value for cumulative at the bottom because, as I said, you are going to be able to see your measure results for each calendar quarter and then cumulatively for the entire year. The next two columns contain the start and end dates for that reporting quarter. And the next column, the data correction deadline date, identifies the date, the last date that you are able to submit late, missing, or corrected assessments in order to have data for those records included in those quarterly measure results. Finally, you'll see that there is a data correction period as of the report run date column. The values that you will see will display in this column are open or closed. If the value of open is displaying, this means that you still have the opportunity to submit late, missing, or corrected assessments, and the data from those assessments will be included in the calculations for that quarter. If the period is identified as closed, you, of course, may continue to submit the data to the ASAP system, so we're sure that we have the most accurate data in the ASAP system, but the data for those records will no longer impact that quarter's measure results. Here is another look at the review and correct report, and we're showing this version of the review and correct report because it depicts the concept of the rolling quarters. So as you can see, the newest quarter reported on this version of the report is quarter 1, 2018. The prior quarters on the previous screenshot were quarters 1 through 4, 2017. So as a new quarter is added to the report, the oldest reporting quarter is removed from the report. CMS received very good feedback from our SNF providers, and based on that feedback, we are going to be making enhancements to this review and correct report to make it a more useful report for you. As you can see on the slide, we are going to be making these enhancements, and you can expect the enhanced review and correct report to be available to you in the spring of 2019. So the things that you can expect to see different would be the addition of the resident level data. So there will be a separate data table beneath the facility level results, which will display a list of all the resident stays that were included in your facility's measure results. In addition, it will identify whether or not that resident stay triggered the measure. Hopefully this will help you identify those residents that you may want to review for a particular measure. And it will be easier to understand which stays were included in the measure results. In addition to the traditional PDF formatted report that you receive now, beginning in spring of 2019, when you request the review and correct report, you will receive the PDF report, but you will also automatically receive a CSV file or comma-separated value file of the resident level results. So there's nothing special that you will need to do to obtain this file. The system will simply create that for you. Having a CSV file will help you have the ability to manipulate the data so that you can view it in a way that's most important to you. Additional enhancements include your ability to add a sort to the data as you see fit. For example, when you are going to be requesting the review and correct report, you are going to be allowed to sort by resident name, resident ID, or resident status. And by resident status, I mean whether or not that resident's stay caused the measure to be triggered or not. And finally, you will also have the ability to run this report for one, multiple, or all quality measures at a time. We understand that there may be times that you only want to view data for one of the measures, and adding this functionality will allow you to do this. Now, I'm sure this webpage is very familiar to most of you. This is the Welcome to the CMS Key Systems for Providers webpage. The reason we're showing this webpage is to remind you how you are to access the CASPER reporting application where the review and correct report is available. So you'll notice that we have identified or circled that link on this webpage. Now, before I proceed to show you how you would request the review and correct report, we want to pause and talk about the concepts of the differences between the compliance calculations for APU and the quality measure calculations for the CASPER reports. We continue to receive a number of help desk questions regarding the differences between the compliance calculation and the quality measure calculations for the CASPER reports. Having received those, we determined that it might be a good idea to develop a table of information that you can use as a resource tool. So let's talk first about the compliance calculations. The purpose of the compliance calculation is to ensure the completeness of the data that's required to calculate the quality measure. The numerator for the compliance calculation is the number of MDS assessments with complete data, meaning the required quality measure item contained a valid value other than a dash. The denominator then for the compliance calculation is the number of MDS assessments submitted prior to the data submission deadline. It's important to note that the compliance is calculated based upon the target date or event date of the assessment. So let's compare that information then to the quality measure calculations. The numerator for the quality measure calculations is the number of SNF stays that triggered the measure. The denominator then is the number of SNF stays that meet the measure denominator criteria, meaning that they were not excluded and they were included in the measure. The quality measures are calculated based upon the end date of the resident's Medicare Part A stay. It might be helpful if you think of the difference between these calculations in this way. Compliance answers the question, did you submit all the data elements with values other than a dash? The goal of the SNF quality reporting program is to calculate the quality measure data for the purpose of comparing the care that provided at different skilled nursing facilities. So then the question of the quality measure scores asks, what are the resident outcomes at your facility? The majority of the SNFs that are non-compliant with the SNF QRP fail to submit the required data for the function measure, which, as we've shown here, is the application of percent of long-term care hospital patients with an admission and discharge functional assessment and a care plan that addresses function. To help you better understand and depict the difference between the compliance calculation and the quality measure calculations, we've included a couple of informational or referencing slides for you. So, thinking back to the compliance calculation, the question to be asked is, did you submit all of the required data? In this example, you'll see that there are 5 residents. Each resident will have 1 admission assessment and 1 discharge assessment, for a total of 10 assessments. Of these 10 assessments shown on this slide, only 8 occurred during our target period, which is the calendar year, January 1st through December 31st. You'll notice that resident 2 has not yet been discharged. Their Medicare Part A stay is ongoing. Therefore, a Medicare Part A discharge record has not been completed or submitted. Resident number 3, you'll notice their admission assessment, their Medicare Part A admission assessment, was submitted in the prior calendar year, so that assessment was included in the prior year's compliance calculation. As you can see, of the 8 assessments considered for this compliance calculation, only 7 assessments were submitted with 100% of the required items that contained a value other than a dash. You'll notice if you look at the assessments for resident number 5, the admission assessment contained a dash in one of the required quality measure items. Therefore, it was not compliant with the requirement to submit complete data. If you look at the APU Threshold Calculation box, you'll note that there were a total of 8 required assessments submitted before the data submission deadline. Of those 8, 7 were submitted prior to the deadline and contained 100% of the required quality measure data. The APU compliance is calculated by dividing the numerator by the denominator and multiplying that value by 100. So in this particular example, you'll see that this facility's APU compliance for the function measure was 87.5%. You'll notice we have included a key concept to help you remember that for the SNF quality reporting program, the required compliance rate is 80%. So 80% of all the assessments submitted for the SNF QRP measures must have a value in the quality measure items other than a dash. So let's compare that example to the quality measure observed performance calculation. Remember, for quality measure scores, the question is, what are the resident outcomes at your facility? Most quality measures use the elements from the resident's admission and discharge assessments to determine the outcome or change that occurred during the resident's stay in your facility. In order to calculate most of the QMs, we must have a pair of assessments, much like we each wear a pair of shoes, right? Without the pair, the shoes aren't very useful. So when we calculate the quality measures, we must have a pair of assessments to calculate those measures. When you look at this slide, you'll notice again, resident number 2 stay is ongoing, therefore there is not yet a Medicare Part A discharge record, so they are not included in the calculations. And resident number 5 stay contained a dash in one of the admission quality measure items. Therefore, they're not included in the quality measure calculations. To calculate the overall observed score, you'll notice that there were 4 stays that were included during this time period, 3 of which were included in the numerator. So to calculate the observed score then for this quality measure, You would divide the numerator by the denominator and multiply that value by 100. You also note that we have included a key concept on this slide, and that is to provide you the definition for the SNF QRP stay. We hope that these slides will be helpful to help you remember or understand the difference between the compliance calculations and the QM observed score calculations. So now we'll go back to our talk about the review and correct report. These screenshots might be familiar to you as well. The left screenshot shows you the KEYS National login page, and that is the login page for the CASPER reporting application. You will use your KEYS user ID and password credentials to log into the CASPER reporting application. Once you log into the application, you will select the Reports button, as identified on the top screenshot, and a list of report categories to which you have access displays on the left frame. Now, the SNF QRP reports are contained in the SNF Quality Reporting Program report category. So once you select that category name, you'll notice that the reports that are available to you to run are displayed in the right frame. To request this review and correct report, all you need to do is select the desired reporting period end date from the drop-down box. Once you select the end date, the CASPER system will automatically display the corresponding begin date for that reporting period. As you can see in the bottom screenshot, then, we are depicting how you will locate your completed review and correct report. When you are requesting a user-requested report, such as the review and correct report, when the report is finished processing, it will always be available to you in your My Inbox folder. So now we're going to pause for another knowledge check. So the question is, the review and correct report provides information for which type of quality measures? Is the answer A, claims-based measures, B, assessment-based measures, or C, both of the above? And we're getting some good response already. I'll wait a few moments and allow everyone the opportunity to respond. And it seems to be slowing, so let's go ahead and take a look at the answer. And the correct answer is B. The review and correct report only displays measure results for the assessment-based measures. Nice job. Let's move ahead now and talk about the QM or quality measure reports. Like the review and correct report, the quality measure reports are also user-requested reports that you can run at any time. These reports you might also hear referred to as the confidential feedback reports. These reports, the data in these reports are available to you prior to the public reporting of the data, and you can use these data on these reports for purposes of quality improvement initiatives in your facility. There are two quality measure reports. There's a facility level quality measure report, which reports your facility aggregate values, and there is a corresponding resident level report, which will identify the residents that are included in those measure calculations when both of those reports are run for the same reporting period. As I mentioned, these reports are available upon demand, so you can run them as often as you wish to do so. When you request this report, you are able to select the data collection end date to obtain your provider's aggregate performance data. It's important to note that the claims-based measure data are not available on the resident level report, but those data are available on the facility level report. So this screenshot shows you the report criteria options that are available to request the SNF facility level QM report. In order to request this report, you would simply select the desired end date, and the system will populate the corresponding begin date for that reporting period. The quality measure reports will report data based on a single reporting period. So in this example, you'll see that the end date selected was June 30th, 2018, and the corresponding begin date for that reporting period was populated by the system, and it is July 1st, 2017. And here's a look at the SNF QRP facility level report. We'll just take a moment and review the information that's present on this report. In the left upper corner, you can see the facility identifying information, similar to what you would see on other SNF QRP reports. And on the right side, we have other date type information. For example, you'll see that the report period displays the date of the reporting period that you selected when you requested the report. The data was calculated on date displays the date that the last monthly calculations occurred for the quality measure data. So as I mentioned earlier, the review and correct report data are calculated weekly, whereas the data for the quality measure reports are calculated on the first day of the month. So that is a bit of a distinction between the two. The next field you see is the comparison group period, and that time period will always coincide with the report period that you selected. Of course, the report run date would be the date that you requested the report, and the report version number simply identifies the version of the software that was used to create the report and that is available to you. Beneath this is then the data table of the results. So you'll see that first the measure name will display, followed by the CMS measure ID, and then the measure results for your facility for that reporting period. So the numerator will include the number of stays that triggered this measure. The denominator includes the number of stays, total number of stays for that reporting period that could have triggered the measure. The facility observed percent is the raw observed percent, which is calculated by dividing the numerator by the denominator and multiplying that value by 100. If the measure being reported on the report is a risk-adjusted measure, then the facility risk-adjusted percent column will display. And of course, in this example, you all know that the percent of residents or patients with pressure ulcers that are new or worsened is a risk-adjusted measure. So you'll see that this risk-adjusted value displays for you. It's another important distinction between this report and the review and correct report. The facility observed the facility risk-adjusted values are not reported on the review and correct report. And finally, you'll see the national average displayed on the report. Displaying the national average for the quality measure allows you to compare your facility's performance to that of all of the SNFs in the nation. Here's some helpful reminder sort of information regarding the quality measure reports. As I mentioned, the data for these reports are refreshed monthly on the first day of each month. This will allow you to see updated information about your facility measure results, as well as the corresponding resident level results that make up your facility aggregate values. This report is a snapshot of performance for quality improvement purposes based on the data that were submitted and the results that are risk-adjusted if the measure is a risk-adjusted measure. It's important to understand that the review and correct reports and QM reports are not static, and the data on those reports will not match. Each of these reports are, the review and correct and the quality measure reports are calculated at different intervals, So you will never be able to reconcile the data between each of those reports. And here are just screenshots showing, again, how you would access the SNF Quality Reporting Program report category, and noting that the 3 SNF QRP reports are available on the right-hand side of the page. And we'll pause for another knowledge check. So the question is, which report currently displays resident-level information? Is the correct response A, the review and correct report, B, the provider preview report, C, the QM or quality measure report, or D, none of the above? And I can see we have some early results that are looking pretty good. But I'll pause for a moment and let others finish answering the question. And it looks as though the responses are slowing down, so we'll go ahead and review the response to the question. The correct response is C, quality measure results, and the majority of you answered that question correctly. So thank you, nice job. The last report that I'd like to review with you that's available in the SNF QRP program is the provider preview report. It's important to remember that the SNF QRP provider preview report only contains facility-level quality measure data. This report is automatically generated quarterly and saved into your provider's shared folder in the CASPER reporting application. And you all know that the first SNF QRP provider preview report was made available to you on June 1st of this year. The data on this report is the same data that will be posted on Nursing Home Compare website. The initial posting of the SNF QRP data on Nursing Home Compare is planned for the fall of 2018. It's important to remember that I've mentioned that you will have 4.5 months after the end of the reporting quarter with which you can submit late, corrected, or missing assessments and have those data included in your measure results. Once the 4.5 months has passed, then there's another half-month time period to generate the preview reports and make them available to you. So you can expect that you will get your provider preview reports approximately 5 months after the end of a reporting quarter. Once the report is available in your shared folder, it will be available for a period of 60 days. CMS highly recommends that you download and print or save the report for future reference, because you will not have the ability to re-request the report. So it's important to download and save that report. As I've mentioned, after the data collection period is ended, you are unable to correct the underlying data in these reports. So when I spoke about the review and correct report, remember that once the data correction deadline has been reached, the data for that reporting quarter is frozen and it is set aside for public reporting. When it's set aside for public reporting, those data then are included in the provider preview report. So that means that by the time the data are on the provider preview report, those data are frozen and you cannot make any adjustments to the measure results. It's important to remember that all corrections must be made prior to the applicable quarterly data correction deadline, or the quarterly freeze date. Once you receive your provider preview report in your shared folder, you will have a period of 30 days with which to review your data prior to those data being publicly posted on the Nursing Home Compare website. Here's some important notes to remember about the provider preview report. It is very important that you review the results of your facility's measures on the provider preview report before those measure data are reported on Nursing Home Compare. You may email any questions about the results or the provider preview report to the SNF QRP Public Reporting Questions email address, and we've included that email address for your convenience on the slide. It's also important to note that when you're reviewing your provider preview report, you may notice that the order of the measures on that report are slightly different than the order that the measures will be reported on the Nursing Home Compare website. It's also important to note that the measure names that display on the provider preview report are different than the consumer language that will display on the Nursing Home Compare website. There will be a crosswalk available so that you can make the comparison between the two names. And here's a look at the SNF QRP Provider Preview Report. Now, the actual report, as you know, is in a text formatted output, but we are using this for demonstration purposes today. You'll notice that the title of the report and the reporting periods display at the top of the report, followed by the your facility characteristic information, and beneath that, then the section of measure results for each measure on the provider preview report. You'll see that the CMS measure ID and measure name display first, followed by the number of stays that were included in the numerator, and that is the number of SNF stays that triggered the measure. The next column is the number of SNF stays that were included in the denominator. And again, that is the number of SNF stays that were not excluded based upon the exclusion criteria for the measure. The next value that's displayed is the facility observed percent. And again, that is calculated by dividing the numerator by the denominator and multiplying that value by 100. If the measure is risk adjusted, then there will be a field for your facility risk adjusted value. If it is not a risk adjusted measure, then that field will not display at all for that measure. And finally, the national percent will display, and this will again allow you to compare your SNF's performance to all of the SNFs in the nation. Beneath the data table, you can kind of see here in this screenshot, there is a footnote legend section. And there are currently 5 footnotes that could apply to the SNF QRP data. If one of the footnotes applies to the measure results for your facility, this means that the results for that particular measure will not be posted on Nursing Home Compare. So let's take a little closer look at each of the footnotes so that you have an understanding what the footnote means if you are to see this on your provider preview report. The first footnote is the number of cases or resident stays is too small to report. This happens when the number of cases or resident stays does not meet the required minimum amount for public reporting. When the number of cases and resident stays is too small to reliably tell how a SNF is performing. And if the number of cases is too small to report, this is implemented to protect the health information, personal health information of the residents included in that measure calculation. The second footnote is data were not available for this reporting period. This footnote could display on your preview report if you have been open for a period of less than 6 months. There simply is not data to report for your facility. This could also display on your report if there were no data to submit for this measure. Finally, if your SNF has had no claims submitted, then this footnote would display for your claims-based measures. Footnote number 3 indicates the results are based on a shorter time period than required. Remember that when we're publicly reporting the assessment-based measures, those are for a year period of time. So in this case, for this footnote, the results are based on data reported from less than the maximum possible time used to collect the data for that measure. Footnote number 4 could appear for your measure on the report if the data were suppressed by CMS for 1 or more quarters. And finally, footnote number 5 could display on your provider preview report if data were not submitted for the reporting period. That means that the SNF did not submit the required quality reporting program data. And here's a look that's probably more familiar to you. This is the text formatted SNF provider preview report, and this looks the same as the report that would have been made available to you beginning in June. The data that's reported on this report is the same data that we reviewed on the earlier slide, but I wanted to be sure that you saw the report that's actually being made available to you. Now, how do you access your provider preview reports? The provider preview reports, as I mentioned, are automatically generated by the system and placed into your provider's shared folder. Now, when you're looking for your provider preview reports, you're going to want to access your non-validation report shared folder. And the non-validation report shared folder would be that folder without the VR reference at the end, and you can see we've highlighted on the screen for you. Once you select your non-VR shared folder, a list of files that are available in that folder display in the right frame. Now, for those of you who have been SNFs for some time, you are likely seeing a number of different files in this folder. So I wanted to take a moment and talk about those files so that you can have an understanding of the difference between them. So when we look at this screenshot, the first 2 files you'll see are the public reporting resident report and the public reporting provider report. Now these reports are created and stored into your provider shared folder on a quarterly basis, and they contain the quality measure results for the MDS 3.0 Quality Initiative measures. The next file you see is a PDF file, and it is the fiscal year non-compliance notification file. Now this file or letter is only stored in your shared folder if your facility has been found to be non-compliant with the SNF quality reporting program, reporting requirements. This report would be issued annually. So if you don't see this letter or file in your shared folder, this means that you did the right thing, you submitted the necessary data, and you have met the SNF QRP reporting requirements. You'll notice 3 files that are labeled 5-star preview reports. Now the 5-star preview reports are generated monthly and stored into your shared folder. And finally, the newest report is the report that we have been talking about, and that is the SNF QRP Provider Preview Report. And it is the SNF QRP Provider Preview Report that contains the measure results that will be posted on the Nursing Home Compare website for the SNF QRP measures. If you would like to obtain additional details about the Review and Correct report or the SNF QRP Quality Measure reports, I would encourage you to access the CASPER Reporting User's Guide. This User's Guide is available to you on the Keys Technical Support Office or QTSO website, and we've included a link to that website for you on the slide. But it's also available to you on the Welcome to the CMS Key Systems for Providers webpage. When you access the CASPER Reporting Guide, as you know, there are a number of different sections available to you for reference. So the information about the SNF Quality Reporting Program reports is contained in Section 13. Here's some important information that might be useful to you about the provider preview reports. The provider preview reports are refreshed and made available to you on a quarterly basis. They are automatically delivered to your shared folder, and these are not reports with which you can re-request at a later time. Once the reports are available to you in your shared folder, you have a period of 30 days with which to review the data before it's posted on the Nursing Home Compare website. This report will provide the performance results for you so that you can use those for quality improvement purposes. Of course, CMS encourages you to review the data in your provider preview report prior to those data being posted publicly on the Nursing Home Compare website. If you disagree with the accuracy of the results or the performance data contained in this report, whether that's the numerator, denominator, or another QM result value, you may request a review of the data by CMS. Requests for CMS review of the provider preview report data must be submitted within that 30-day time period. The 30-day time period begins the date that the provider preview reports are stored in your facility shared folder. It's important to remember that you will not have the opportunity to request the correction of underlying data if the data correction deadline has already passed. If you would like a CMS review of your data in your provider preview report, there are certain steps that you must take when requesting this of CMS. You must submit this request via email to the SNF QRP PR questions email address, and we've included that on the slide for you. In the subject line of the email, you must include your provider name, the words SNF Public Reporting Request for Review of Data, and your provider's CCN or CMS certification number. Within the body of the email, then, there's certain information that you must include, and we've identified this information for you. So while you included your CCN in the subject line, you must also include your CCN in the body of the email. You must include your business name, your business address, the CEO or CEO designated representative contact information, which includes their name, email address, telephone number, and physical mailing address. In addition to this information, you must provide information that supports your belief why the data contained within the provider preview report is erroneous. You must specifically identify which measure is in question and which of the measure results you have concerns with. CMS will review all requests and provide a response via email once a decision has been reached. Data that CMS agrees to correct will be reflected in the subsequent quarterly release of the quality measure data on the Nursing Home Compare website. And one very important thing to remember is that CMS will not review any email requests that include protected health information. It is a security violation to email PHI or protected health information, so please refrain from doing so. So I've mentioned the Nursing Home Compare website, and I'm sure that many of you are already familiar with this website, but we have included a few slides for your reference should you be interested. You'll notice at the bottom of this slide we have included the link that will take you directly to the Nursing Home Compare website, and shown here is the homepage for the website. This screenshot will show you how you can learn how the data that's available on the Nursing Home Compare website is important to you. And again, another page of information that provides information about the data that's available on the Nursing Home Compare website. So let's pause. We're going to have several knowledge check questions now. So the question now is, which report displays results that will be posted on the Nursing Home Compare website? Is the answer A, the provider preview report, B, the QM or quality measure report, C, the review and correct report, or D, the confidential feedback report? And I'll pause and let you all answer the question. And it looks like the responses are slowing down, so let's go ahead and take a look at the correct answer. And most of you did get the correct answer, and that is the provider preview report. That is the report that contains the data that will be posted on the Nursing Home Compare website. And here's another knowledge check. The question is, the SNF QRP reports reviewed can all be accessed through, is it the automated survey processing environment or the Aspen environment? Is it the quality improvement and evaluation system or keys? Or is it CASPER? And I see that a few more responses are coming in, so I'll wait a moment. Okay, they appear to be slowing down, so let's check out the correct answer. And the correct answer is C. The CASPER application is where you will access the SNF QRP reports. Nice job. The next question has to do with the CMS review of the provider preview report. So the question is, requests for CMS to review your provider preview report data must be submitted via email. Is the answer A, true, or B, false? And I'm getting a lot of responses already. I'll just pause a moment and allow anyone else to answer the question. Okay, it looks like things are slowing down. 98% of you answered letter A, true, and that is the correct answer. Nice job. And here's the last knowledge check question. The question is, the provider preview report provides a blank preview period prior to public reporting. Is the correct response A, a 15-day review period, B, a 30-day review period, C, a 60-day review period, or D, a 90-day review period? And we're getting a lot of responses already. And it looks like things are slowing down, so let's review. The correct answer is B, and the vast majority of you selected the correct response. Once your provider preview report is available in your shared folder, you will have a period of 30 days to review those data before they're posted on the Nursing Home Compare website. So we've included some important notes. Mostly these are just a reiteration of what we've talked about so far, but these might be important slides to take home and use as a referencing tool later. So to recap, the numerator is the number of SNF stays in your facility that met the criteria to trigger or be counted in the measure. The denominator is the number of SNF stays in your facility that could have triggered or been counted in the measure. It's important to remember that the denominator value may be different across the assessment-based measures for the same reporting period because different criteria are used to determine the denominator for each of the assessment-based measures. It's also important to remember that some SNF stays could be excluded from one measure because they met certain exclusion criteria. However, that same SNF stay would be included in other measure results. The observed percent then is the raw facility percentage or performance, which is calculated by dividing the numerator value by the denominator value and multiplying that value by 100. The risk-adjusted percent value only displays on the quality measure reports or the provider preview reports if the measure being reported is a risk-adjusted measure. Right now in the SNF QRP program, there's only one risk-adjusted measure currently being reported, and that is the percent of patients or residents with pressure ulcers that are new or worsened. And remember that the risk-adjusted percent takes into account different resident level characteristics, which could put that resident at a higher risk for triggering that measure. If you're interested in learning how the SNF QRP quality measures are calculated, we would invite you to access the SNF QRP Quality Measure User's Manual. That User's Manual is available on the CMS website, and we have included a link so that you can easily access the manual. And some more summary type information. As I mentioned early in the presentation, for the SNF Quality Reporting Program, there are two types of QMs based on data sources. And the two data sources used for the SNF QRP measures are the assessment-based measures, which are calculated from the MDS data, and the Medicare fee-for-service claims-based measures. There are three SNF Quality Reporting Program reports available to you in CASPER: the Review and Correct Report, the Quality Measure Reports, and the Provider Preview Report. And recall that the Review and Correct Report and the Quality Measure Reports are user-requested on-demand reports that you can run at any time. The Provider Preview Report, however, is a system-generated report that occurs quarterly, and it's automatically made available to you in your provider's shared folder. The Review and Correct Report is a snapshot of your facility performance at the time of the report. It does not contain risk-adjusted values. The Review and Correct Report contains the data correction deadline, so you can easily identify whether the reporting quarter, the data correction period, for the reporting quarter, and then you can also identify whether that data correction period is open as of the date that that Review and Correct Report was requested. The data, as we saw on the Review and Correct Report, is displayed by calendar quarter. There are 4 calendar quarters plus a cumulative row of data on the Review and Correct Report. When we're viewing the Review and Correct Report, the newest quarter being reported is always displayed at the top. As I mentioned, the quality measure reports provide both facility and resident level information for a single reporting period. And these are often called the confidential feedback reports. The Provider Preview Report reflects data that will be posted on the Nursing Home Compare website. And as I mentioned, you will have a 30-day review period once those Provider Preview Reports are available to you in your shared folder. And now it's time for you all to share some of your action plan ideas. So go ahead and enter your ideas into Slido. And I see we have one to review here. There are so many different QMs that we use in this setting. Be sure your team understands the different definitions and reports available so you are looking at the correct data for the correct reason. That's an excellent point. The SNF QRP versus the 5-star versus the publicly reported versus the survey. It's important to know the difference. That's a very good action plan and observation. While you're all thinking about your action plans, I would open up the floor to questions if you have any questions regarding the SNF Quality Reporting Program reports. And I see no questions, and it looks like you're going to get to break a little earlier. So thank you for your attention. I hope that this has been useful information.